What's up, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name is Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, coming to you live from Budapest, Hungary. Today is August 19th, 2025, around 8:15 p.m. where I'm at right now. And we are continuing our 13th book in our Book to React series. This is episode 24 of Black Slaves in the late 19th century and lived through most of the 20th century and saw so many gains, so many step backs in progress, dedicated his life to revolutionary struggle and anti-fascist work and trying to uplift the working class and particularly Black Americans. This man is a hero of mine after reading this book, and hopefully maybe I have encouraged you to find the hero within yourself, to get involved, be active politically, sign up to some group, be out there in your community to actually make the change you want to see, because that's what Harry Haywood did with his life. He didn't care about the obstacles. He didn't care about the setbacks that were ahead of him. He just kept trudging forward and kept on fighting for what he believed is right and put his life on the line for it. Now, this is a very long book. It's the longest book that we've ever read in the Book to React series, hence why we have so many parts to this series. But good news for anybody who's tired of me going live every day reading this text, if you're an old-time subscriber. We only have one more chapter to go after today's episode. Today we will be reading chapter 21, A Party Weakened from Within. It's about 30 pages. We're starting on page 570, and we'll be wrapping up on page 604 or 605. Then we only have one more chapter left of this close to 700-page book. Revisionism Takes Command. Hopefully we'll be finishing that tomorrow, if not on Thursday. And if you want to get a copy of this book, which is partially the reason why we do these live readings, you can go to libcom.org, scroll down, download the attachment right here. You can also go to Marxist.org to pick up this book, easy to find as well. But if you want that physical copy, you got to shell out about $40 to pick it up in paperback off Amazon, or close to half of your month's rent if you live in the United States of America for the hardcover version. But without further ado, we're going to be picking up on chapter 21, A Party Weakened from Within. And we're at this point in Harry's life right now where the Communist Party after World War II is basically trying to fight back against revisionism and right-wing trends within the group. And they were, they did partially the job of getting rid of the right-wing forces that were trying to make the Communist Party essentially like liberal Republicans, if for a modern description. But they didn't go far enough. There wasn't a total left victory getting rid of the revisionists, the Trotskyists, the Browderists within the party. So here in chapter 21, we're going to see what Harry has to say. And looking at the title, most likely the party has now become a shell of its former self. But let's jump in. By the morning after the November 1948 election, the party's house of cards was already beginning to collapse. In a surprise upset over Republican Thomas E. Dewey, Truman was re-elected president, with Henry Wallace receiving a scant 1,000,000 votes. The illusions most party leaders had held of launching a third party on firm foundations of farm labor support were smashed, reflecting our gross overestimation of the whole Progressive Party movement. I and many of my friends wondered then what would happen to the leadership's designs for the Grand Coalition. It was in an atmosphere of increasing isolation and a rising Red Scare that the party prepared for the trial of the 11 indicted leaders, which began in January 1949. Since the end of the war, the government had been winding up the machinery for a full-scale attack on the left. The Smith Act, which had been passed in 1940, was now being fully enforced. Knowing full well that the party still had strong roots among the masses, the Cold War offensive became U.S. imperialism's response to the growing trend of world revolution. Imperialism emerged from World War II in a greatly weakened position as the Eastern European countries joined the socialist camp and popular movements swept the developing countries. The popular forces of revolution were on the march in all countries without exception. Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the West Indies, said R. Palm Dutt. The breach in the structure of world imperialism was widened by the emergence of socialist countries in Eastern Europe. But most important, from the standpoint of its effect on colonial people, was the victory of the Chinese Revolution. The success of the national and socialist revolutions in China extended the world's socialist sector to one-third of humanity, transforming the balance of world forces in favor of the camp of socialism and national liberation, giving sweeping impetus to the anti-imperialist revolution. It was through this widening breach that the revolutionary movements of the Third World surged toward political independence and the establishment of new sovereign states. Objectively speaking, these developments could have greatly strengthened our position in the fight against the government's anti-communist offensive. The party should have boldly opposed this assault and done broad propaganda and agitation on the source of these attacks. Instead, the right-wingers chose the defeatist policy of furthering our retreat from the masses. Personally, I often found myself being trailed by FBI agents. I couldn't get a job and found it difficult renting a place to live without the FBI intervening. I remember my wife threatening to call the health inspector on one of our slum landlords. "Mrs. Hall," he said shyly, "I care about the health inspectors about as much as your husband cares about the FBI." Scores of communists and activists in the labor movement, the black movement, and various anti-fascist committees were arrested, indicted, or brought before congressional and Senate committees to testify. It was the era of deportations, the Taft-Hartley anti-labor law, the loyalty oath, and blacklist. Gerhard Eisler, a German who had been a Comintern rep to the U.S. in the 30s and a good friend of mine, was arrested and deported as a master spy. A group of 10 Hollywood producers, directors, and writers were blacklisted for their supposed communist leanings and served jail sentences for refusing to testify before the HUAC. Eugene Dennis was convicted of contempt of Congress, not attempt. I don't know why I said attempt. Eugene Dennis was convicted of contempt of Congress in June 1947 for refusing to testify. Bill Patterson was charged with contempt of Congress after being called a N-word son of a bitch in a Senate hearing and shouting, "You're another son of a bitch," in response. That's hilarious. That's kind of funny. Pat and I were good friends at the time and also did some political work together. One day in the summer of 1948, he called me up on the phone. "Come on over here, Harry. There's somebody I'd like you to meet." I went around the corner to the building where he lived and walked up to the apartment. Sitting there was Haywood Patterson, one of the few remaining Scottsboro frame-up victims who had not been paroled. He had just escaped from Kilby Prison. I recognized him right away because he looked like his mother, whom I had met in Chattanooga. He was a handsome young man, about 33 at the time, well-built and above average height. But his most outstanding feature was his big, luminous eyes. Patterson told us the harrowing story of his prison escape and about his experiences while in prison. As we sat there talking, somebody, I don't remember who, got the idea that it would be a good thing to get young Patterson's story down on paper. Pat then suggested that we call Earl Conrad. I can't believe at this point it's 1948 and the Scottsboro boys are still locked up. You get what I'm saying? But America is unjust, wicked, racist, and evil to its very bone. So anyway, I thought this was a fine idea. I knew Conrad and thought a lot of his work. As a young white man, he had done a good bit of writing about the black liberation struggle, even written for some black newspapers, and enjoyed wide respect among the masses. Conrad came over to the apartment and immediately agreed to work on the book. He took Haywood with him to his apartment, and in 2 weeks they wrote the story of Scottsboro Boy. Haywood Patterson later went to Detroit to stay with his sister. The Civil Rights Congress initiated a campaign to stop his extradition, and Michigan's Governor G. Menham Soapy Williams refused to sign the extradition papers, saying that the man could not get a fair trial in Alabama. Can any black man get a fair trial in Alabama? Unfortunately, Haywood Patterson was soon after convicted of murder resulting from a barroom brawl. Okay, he was tripping, but I wouldn't be surprised if the brother didn't know any other way to resort to things other than violence because of his years of incarceration and the violence he saw around him. He was to remain in prison until he died in 1959. What a tragedy. Absolute tragedy. In January 1949, I was looking for a way to make some money and thought about sailing again. I wondered whether I would still be able to get on a ship since communists were being screened by the Coast Guard. But I was lucky. They didn't seem to know me and I was able to get a Coast Guard pass. I signed on my old wartime ship, the Moore McCormack liner Uruguay, for a 38-day cruise to Buenos Aires as a waiter. It was my last voyage as an NMU seaman. As far as the crew was concerned, it was a different ballgame. The Curranites were firmly entrenched by this time and dominated the ship. It was the first time I had sailed under such conditions and only knew a few old shipmates who hadn't yet been screamed out. Congressman Bob La Follette Jr., a progressive of the Henry Wallace type, was a passenger on that ship and was invited to speak to us. I guess it was a sign of the times that a man of such liberal reputation delivered as vicious and all-out attack on Reds as he did on that occasion. We can't trust liberals. Can't trust liberals. Gotta shake off the liberals, man, because I can't believe the CPUSA did all that work to cozy up to liberal Republicans at the time, before the party switch, and then still they get, red baited, and then they get, oath tested out of positions of power. Absolutely insane. I pretty much kept to myself on the trip. It was a pleasant though uneventful voyage. The first time I had been in South America. We stopped in Trinidad, curved out around the coast of Brazil to Bahia, a city rich in the early history and culture of the Africans brought over as slaves. Then on to Rio de Janeiro, Santos, the port of Sao Paulo, Montevideo, and finally Buenos Aires. On returning to New York, I was assigned to do research for the defense and the trial of the 11 communist leaders. I was glad to get the assignment, glad to be doing some party work for a change. My job was to help Benjamin Davis and Robert Thompson in preparation for their depositions and to anticipate questions that might be asked by the prosecution. We worked closely with their attorney, Harry Satcher, a very energetic and bright guy. Like the other defendants, Thompson and Davis were charged under the Smith Act with conspiring to organize the CPUSA, a society group and assembly of persons who teach and advocate to overthrow and destruction of the government of the United States of America by forces and violence, and knowingly and willfully to advocate the overthrow and destruction of the government of the United States by force and violence. Thanks, guys. I want to thank all of you for actually sending me the Smith Act. It took us like 40 pages to actually get in clear writing what the Smith Act was. But essentially, it's illegal to say you want to overthrow the U.S. government. Now, I thought the Supreme Court upheld that's a part of freedom of speech. You can legally say we need to have a violent revolution to overthrow the United States government. That's legal to say under, the First Amendment. But I guess at that time that precedent had not been set by the Supreme Court. Anyway, the other major charge was that of liquidating the CPA and conspiring to reorganize the CPUSA. Bob Thompson was a war hero who had fought in Spain and in New Guinea during World War II, where he won the Distinguished Service Cross. At the time of his indictment, he was one of Foster's protégés and was secretary of the New York district. He was eventually sentenced to 3 years and while in jail was beaten severely by a fascist thug. He never fully recovered from the head wound he received as a result. Ben Davis was by that time a member of the New York City Council and the leading black in the party. He was a longtime acquaintance of mine, as I have already mentioned, and we had developed considerable political differences over the years. I was nevertheless pleased to be working on his defense. It was at this time that I met George Crockett, a young and very idealistic black attorney from Detroit. Today he is a judge in that city. I think some of his illusions about bourgeoisie democracy were lost at this trial. He was once moved to tears of amazement at one of the more crude and arbitrary rulings of Judge Medina. Crockett spent 30 days in jail for contempt, along with the other attorneys in the case, Satcher, Abraham Isserman, Lewis McCabe, and Richard Gladstein. The trial, which was held in the federal courthouse in Foley Square in New York, lasted 9 months. From the start, it was clearly not a trial, but an inquisition on the Communist Party. The press willingly colluded with the government attack, and the outcome of the case was a foregone conclusion. Presiding at this mockery of justice was the eminent jurist, millionaire, and landlord, Judge Harold Medina. I went to the courtroom every day and sat through the interminable, boring sessions. I saw the viciousness and red baiting of Medina and the prosecutor, Francis McGoey, firsthand, as well as the unseemly array of stool pigeons the government had mustered to its side. Much has been said and written about this trial, and I will not go into much more detail here. It was significant in that it was here that the theory of peaceful transition to socialism was first put forward as party policy. The defense had two choices in terms of a legal strategy for this trial. An offensive strategy would have meant proclaiming the right to advocate revolution, to stand firmly on the First Amendment, to make the courtroom a tribune of the people as Dimitrov had done when the Nazis charged him with burning the Reichstag in 1933. A defensive line would have meant trying to prove that the defendants didn't do what they were charged with and would involve a lengthy explanation of the history of the communist movement worldwide. There was some struggle over these two lines, but it was the defensive strategy which was the main adopted, in the main adopted. Foster's deposition served as one of the party's main lines of defense. In it, he outlines a course of the workers' struggle for socialism via a People's Front government, the perspective for achieving socialism in the U.S. along constitutional and peaceful channels. Foster elaborated some of this point a year and a half later. The establishment of a people's democracy in the United States would signify that the coalition of workers and their allies had won a decisive political victory over monopoly capital, and that a government had come into power committed to the abolition of capitalism and the establishment of socialism. Such a government might evolve either from a People's Front coalition government through an internal regrouping of forces, or it might be elected by the masses of the American people after the People's Front government had served its function. In either event, the working class and its allies would carry through their democratic program, curbing all violent legal efforts of monopolist reaction to defeat it and set up a fascist state. I mean, this is just idealist. I know that William Z. Foster and all the communists that were indicted by the federal government were facing like life in prison, but if the trial is just a kangaroo court, just go for it. Just say, yo, my First Amendment rights say I can say fuck the president, we need to overthrow the government. This is all constitutionally protected. You don't need to pussyfoot and then say, you know, us communists, we kind of just want a peaceful transition to power and that'll happen when all the workers hold hands. No, fuck no. That's not how it's going to happen. We're going to have to actually hang some capitalists. We're going to have to actually have a violent overthrow of the capitalist order. That's the only way to get to socialism. What are y'all talking about? Where in Marxist theory, where in Leninist theory do they say that we're going to have a peaceful transition of power through the bourgeoisie mechanics of government and democracy? That makes no sense. That makes no sense. Somebody's going to have to die. There will have to be bloodshed. We'll have to die, and some of the others will have to die, but that's the way that it's actually going to go down. The capitalist class, the bourgeoisie class, will not willingly give up power. That's not how it's going to go down. Anyway, Foster obviously saw the development of this theory not just as a defensive legal strategy, but as a political line. He was later to describe it as the most important theoretical advance ever made by the CPUSA on its own initiative. On October 14th, 1949, the 11 were convicted. All received 5-year sentences, except Thompson, whose sentence was reduced because of his wartime record. The case was appealed all the way to the Supreme Court, where the convictions were upheld. They started serving their sentences on July 2nd, 1951, with the exception of Thompson, Hall, Winston, and Green, all of whom went underground. They too were eventually captured or turned themselves in and served some time behind bars. Released from my assignment on the defense team, I again started looking around for a way to support myself. I would have liked to continue as a seaman, but that was impossible since it was only a matter of time before the Coast Guard would catch up with my record. Some friends suggested that I write a sequel to my book, which had been translated in all of the European socialist countries, with the exception of Yugoslavia. If I got to China, I was sure it would be published there. Writers' unions in the various countries would undoubtedly sponsor lectures for me and ask me to write articles. The more I thought of the idea, the more I liked it. I discussed it with Belle, and she was enthusiastic, agreeing to come along as my secretary. All we needed now was an okay from the party. I raised the matter in the Negro Commission, which was at that time headed by Pettis Perry. The project was approved, and we were given a green light to raise funds. Everything went along fine. A few fundraising parties were given, one by Paul Robeson. Some affluent individuals were also solicited. Dashiell Hammett contributed $1,000 and said that he would be satisfied if I wrote another book as good as the first. In a few weeks, several $1,000s had been raised, and Belle and I booked a passage on the French liner de Grasse. This was a real passport bro, man. Come on, man. Man, them moving to China. Man, them moving to socialist China right after Mao and them just kicked, what was his name? The nationalist ass. What is it? Who was the name? Kai-Shen-Shek? That sounds racist as hell. Who was the leader of the nationalist group in China? I don't know. Anyway, brother was moving around, man, and I'm so impressed that I didn't expect this in this book when I picked it up, that the brother will be traveling so much. You know what I mean? And this is also inspiration for me because I love to travel. I want to live in some different countries. And the man got to live in Russia, got to travel all through South Africa, India, now moving to China. It's just crazy. A couple of days before sailing, I stopped in at the Daily Worker office to pick up a press card. To my profound surprise, the editor, Johnny Gates, refused to give me one. This was all the more astounding in the view of the fact that Gates himself had sent a letter accompanying my application for a passport, supporting my claim that one of the purposes of my going abroad was to write a series of articles for the Daily Worker. When I asked Gates why he refused, he mumbled something about not giving press cards out to everybody. Stunned and speechless, I went upstairs to the national office where I saw Henry Winston, National Organizational Secretary. At the time, I thought a lot of Winston. He had given me much needed support in overcoming the opposition of sundry bureaucrats and white chauvinists to publishing my book. I told him what had happened. What goes on here, I asked. Anybody can get a Daily Worker card. Why am I refused one on the day of my departure? Winston looked perturbed. He went back into the office. I presumed either to call Gates or to consult with other members of the Secretariat. He came back with an embarrassed expression on his face and said, "We can't do anything about it now." Evidently, it was Gates' decision, and the Secretariat felt they could not overrule him at the time. He then said, "What's a Daily Worker card, Harry? You really don't need one." "At least it would be some kind of credential," I replied. At the time, I only had a press card from the California Eagle, a progressive black newspaper in Los Angeles, which was published by Mrs. Charlotta Bass, and a letter from the Council on African Affairs. Winston went back into the office again, and upon returning, he asked, "Harry, weren't you a friend of Bill Dunn?" Dunn was among those who had been expelled as a left sectarian. I was astounded. Sure, so a lot of people were friends with Dunn. William Foster was also a friend of his. Is that a reason for denying me a press card? He told me that I had been shaking hands with him recently. That's a lie, I said. Then I remembered some members of the staff of the Jefferson School had given a reception for me on the occasion of the publishing of my book. While speaking, I noticed Bill Dunn in the audience. As I stepped down from the platform, he rushed forward to shake my hand. Knowing it would put me on the spot in front of a lot of people, I turned my back on him. Later, I felt very bad about it too. I told Winston all of this and then asked if there were someone accusing me of a political association with Dunn. He evaded all my questions and said that the matter could not be settled then. "Go ahead, Harry, get on the ship." We shook hands and I left the office. I called up James Ford, who since his fall from the leadership had become much friendlier to the left. I told him what had happened. He said they were trying to keep me from going. I didn't know who they were, but I certainly knew that I had enemies in the party. Once again, I don't understand. Well, I get it, but it's really surprising reading this book that, a lot of what made his time in the Communist Party like frustrating at moments, because I know he was frustrated then. He didn't mention it, but what I can tell made him very frustrated was that, you know, a lot of the people in the party are assholes, like straight up assholes. And I'm not saying people in the party are assholes now, but in any organization, you're going to have people that are like dickheads, that's hard to get along with, people that are just, you know, bitchy and backbitey. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, it's kind of strange, very strange. But let's continue here. So, going to Paris, we sailed at noon the next day, and a number of friends saw us off. Someone asked, "What are you looking so gloomy about? You should be happy." "I am," I lied. We were leaving under a cloud, and I had a gnawing premonition that there were storms ahead. We were depressed during the voyage across, despite the fact that our fellow passengers included Lena Horne, her husband, Lenny Hayton, Chico Hamilton and his band, and Kenneth Spener, the well-known basso. All were friends of the left. It was April 1950, and our spirits rose at the sight of Paris in the spring. We put up a small hotel on the Rue Montmartre and immediately set out to contact friends and people who would be of help to us in our project. Our most important contact in Paris was an old friend, Bill Gebert. Bill was Polish. He had been secretary of the Illinois district of the party and lived half his life in the United States, but he had not succeeded in getting citizenship. He had been among the group of foreign comrades who had been rounding up and deported a couple of years before. Returning to Poland, he was assigned to trade union work and had become a representative to the World Federation of Trade Unions, or WFTU, and a member of its secretariat located in Paris. We were delighted to see each other. After giving him the lowdown on the situation in the U.S., I told him about my project and asked if he could be of help. He immediately picked up the phone and called the Polish ambassador, who invited all three of us to dinner at the Polish embassy the next evening. We met the ambassador, the well-known Polish poet Jerzy Tutrament, who after hearing about my project, suggested that we make Poland our jump-off place. We were fortunate, he said, for a World Writers' Conference to be held in Warsaw that summer. It would be easy for him to arrange for me and my wife to attend it as guests of the Polish Writers' Union. We could then stay in Poland while making contacts and arrangements for a visit to other socialist countries. He said that he would take the matter up immediately with the proper authorities and assured us there would be no difficulty. He asked us to come around to the Polish consulate during the next few days and apply for visas. He would personally see that they were put through. What a relief. At last we were on our way. It was at this time that we were introduced to Blackman, a West African poet and then editor of the English edition of the World Peace Movement magazine, which was published in Paris. He knew William Patterson and Paul Robeson and later proved to be one of our best friends we had in Paris. We met Gabrielle Marie de Aubesseur, a representative from the Ivory Coast, who was then vice president of the French Union, a member of the Chamber of Deputies, and general secretary of the African Democratic Rally, a liberation movement embracing the former French colonies of West Africa. It was through him that I met a number of black deputies and senators, including Felix Houphouët-Boigny, president of the rally. Although a millionaire and owner of a large plantation, he was then considered a progressive. Today, he is president of the Ivory Coast Republic and quite conservative. Very interesting, man. This man met everybody, moved all around. I'm just waiting for him to meet W.B. Du Bois, because wasn't Du Bois still walking the earth at this time? And I saw that picture earlier in the book where he had W.B. Du Bois meeting Mao Zedong. This man met Stalin. I totally forgot about that. That was like a month ago when we read that chapter. The man got to hang out with Stalin, met the future president of the Ivory Coast, was friends with Paul Robeson. You know what I mean? I'm just waiting for him to meet Jesus. Not like passing on, but like Jesus is going to come down. Like, yo, we were in the party headquarters and Jesus Christ said, "All right, brothers, I'm with you," and then disappeared into a cloud of smoke. Anyway, then there was a young Frenchman named Herve, who was the editor of Action Magazine, a progressive Parisian journal. He interviewed de Aubesseur, Bell, and myself for his paper. We had a very cordial discussion of the similarities and differences between the struggles of the colonially oppressed people in Africa and black people in the U.S. Stimulated by this discussion, I wrote an article on the condition of blacks in the U.S. for the paper of the anti-colonialist youth movement at the Sorbonne. One of my most memorable experiences in Paris was the Bastille Day Parade of July 14, 1950. Tens of thousands of people gathered to march through the working class districts of Paris. Communist Party leaders like Maurice Thorez and Jacques Duclos shared the speaker's platform with black deputies, senators, and other dignitaries from the former French colonies with whom they had, through the post-war years, developed a close relationship. Belle and I were in the parade, and it was a very exciting and invigorating experience for us both. The Korean War had just broken out, and I remember the militant chants of Le Khori Osh Korean, Korea for the Koreans. We saw thousands of Algerians lining up in the side streets and preparing to join the march. In Paris, we were never bored. Our new friends took us everywhere. D'Arboussour took us to his home in the country. We also visited Houphouët-Boigny at his chateau with 30 kilometers from Paris. My French pronunciations are horrible. We met a number of African senators and deputies, and D'Arboussour was organizing a banquet in my honor. By this time, however, we began to worry about our project. It was drawing near the date of the Writers' Conference in Warsaw, and even some American delegates began passing through Paris on their way to the conference. For instance, we heard that Joe North, a well-known communist writer, was in town on his way to Warsaw. Others, like Mrs. Bass, were going to the World Peace Conference in Prague. Still, we had received no word from the Polish embassy. We had called there several times, and we were told that the visas had not yet come through yet. Bill Gerbert was out of town on a long tour of Asia and North Africa for the WFTU, so we had no way of finding out what was behind all the delay. We had been in Paris almost 3 months now, and to add to our anxiety, we were pretty sure that we were being followed. When the conference convened in Warsaw, we knew very definitely that something was wrong. Then we realized that we hadn't seen D'Arboussour or Blackman in days. While sitting in our hotel room one night in deep depression, there was a knock at the door, and a good friend of ours, an African whose name I won't mention in this context, entered. He was frowning, and we knew it was bad news. "What's up?" I asked. "I've got bad news for you," he said. He then proceeded to tell us that a few days earlier he had been called in to see a representative of the Central Committee of the French Party and had been told that they had it from reliable sources that Harry Haywood was a spy of the U.S. State Department. That's crazy. Of all things to accuse Harry Haywood of is being a U.S. spy, that's insane. I really feel like the party is trying to sabotage Harry. You know what I mean? Once again, I'm not blaming the party in and of itself, because a party is just nothing but a collection of individuals. And some individuals are assholes. And there might have been some individuals, who contacted the French party from the U.S. party and said, "Hey, Harry is a spy. Don't hang out with him. Don't work with him." Anyway, he had been horrified by the news and insisted that it could not possibly be true. I told him that I had known you only in Paris, but that you had come with letters of introduction from Paul Robeson, William Patterson, and others. Since then, I had received letters from other friends verifying your credentials and asking me to do everything to expedite your project. So I told him. He continued that they were making a horrible mistake, but the representative of the Central Committee insisted that their sources were reliable, that they had the information from their security people. Furthermore, it did not originate from here, but from over there in the U.S. He told me further that the French Central Committee had sent word out to all progressive organizations in Paris, warning them about me and requesting that I be barred from all their offices as an enemy agent. Wow. He then warned me, under pain of disciplinary action, to sever my relationship with you, and under no circumstance was I to inform you of these charges. I thought about this a few days and finally decided to violate their discipline because I was sure that they were wrong. I was terribly unfair to you and your wife not to have told you about it. We sat there stunned. Finally, our friend asked, "Harry, do you have any bona fides besides the letters from the Council on African Affairs. Haven't you got anything from the party itself? I admitted I had nothing. So it sounds like not giving him a press pass was meant to sabotage him when he made it to France. Because it sounds like the party in the U.S. was going to say, yo, when Harry makes it to China, God forbid, we're going to tell the Chinese communists he's a spy, and then they can kill him. This is crazy. I would have went gung-ho. I would have went back to the CPUSA office in New York and started slapping bitches. For real. Like, y'all really playing with my life. That's crazy. Then he said, you had better get in touch with them as quick as possible. He rose and said, I wish you good people the best of luck. I'm sure that things will turn out all right, and that we will meet under more pleasant circumstances. He embraced us and left. Now it had become clear why we had not received our Polish visa, why de Arbusor and other friends had stopped coming around, why we were being tailed, probably both by the U.S. Embassy and the French Communist Party, and why I had heard no more about the affair being planned for me by the African Democratic Rally. We were now completely isolated. We went immediately to the Grand Hotel on the Boulevard des Capucines, across from the Opera House, where I telephoned Patterson in New York. I told him of our predicament and asked him to relay the message immediately to the Secretariat. He was, of course, astounded and promised he would do so first thing in the morning. He told us to keep our spirits up and that I would hear from someone in a few days. That night I had my first ulcer attack. The next morning I called the WFTU to see if Gebert had returned. Fortunately, he had, and we took a cab to his office. As I told him the story, he kept shaking his head and muttering, "Unbelievable." Finally, after I had finished, he said, I had heard things were not so good back there, but I didn't think they were that bad. He then told us that Tutrament had been assigned a new job as president of the Polish Writers' Union and that there was now a new ambassador. He then picked up the phone and called the Polish embassy to find out what had happened to our applications for visas. Listening intently for a moment or two, I almost dropped my phone, sorry. Hold on. All right. Listening intently for a moment or two, he put down the receiver, then shook his head and said, They say, Harry, that they did not find it possible to give you a visa at this time. That's all they would say. It was now apparent to me that the word had been spread throughout the international communist community that I was a spy, but by the time I had become quite immune to shock. Several days later, I received a letter from Patterson in which he stated that he had brought the matter before the Secretariat. They were all profoundly shocked and all disclaimed any knowledge of the source of the spy charge, denying that it came from there. He said that they were taking the matter up and that I should stand by to hear from Winston in a couple of days. The letter from Winston arrived, expressing his regrets and those of the other leading comrades over the unfortunate turn of events which had prevented me from proceeding with my project. He assured me that they had the fullest confidence in my integrity and were profoundly shocked by the charges. He went on further to explain that during the war, communication lines with other parties had been broken. They had not yet been fully restored, and perhaps that was the source of all this confusion. He suggested that we return to the States while they straighten the matter out and then start over again, this time under the auspices of the party with the proper credentials. It was in August, and we ran into the rush of Americans returning home when we tried to book passage. The only thing available was first-class passage on a ship, sailing from Antwerp, Belgium, in about 2 weeks. Winston wired me $600 for fare and expenses. With time on our hands and anxious to get out of Paris, we went to Amsterdam to visit Otto and Hermie Huiswoerd. After serving as head of the International Negro Trade Union Committee in Hamburg, Germany, and being forced to flee from one country and another in the face of the fascist advance of the 30s, Huiswoerd returned to the U.S. just before the fall of France. With U.S. entry into the war, however, he returned to his native Dutch Guyana, where he was soon thrown into a concentration camp by the Dutch. When he was released after the war, the U.S. government refused to let him back into the country. Huiswoerd and his wife then decided to settle in Holland, where he was recognized as a citizen. Now moving on to the Cold War. Finally, we boarded the ship at Antwerp for an uneventful passage home. We were met at the dock in New York by Maud White and her husband, Arthur Katz. Immediately upon landing, I got in touch with the national office. I was told that a meeting of the Secretariat had been arranged for the next morning. Arriving at the national office, I was met by my old friend, Claude Lightfoot, whom the leadership had brought in from Chicago, especially for the occasion. "Now, Harry, hold your temper. Keep cool," he pleaded with me. "Just keep cool and we'll work things out." Nearly the whole of the Politburo was present for the meeting, including Hall, Stachel, Winston, Perry, and Davis. Where's his brother Otto? Where's Otto? Because I swear to God, if somebody did this to me, telling people I'm a spy and I'm off in a foreign land and it's just me and my wife, and we could be killed for that type of shit had we made it to Russia or China, bruh, me and my brother Otto would have sprayed that bitch up. For real. This is crazy. I can't believe people would have done this. You know what I mean? There's no excuse for that. This sort of treachery, this level of backbiting, this level of bitch-assness, for real. Who thought this was a good idea? I really think, though, once again, I'm not blaming the party. I'm blaming the individuals. And it's very likely that at this point, the CPUSA was crawling with agents. Like, damn near every 2 out of 3 people there might have been an alphabet boy. You know what I mean? So, let that be what it may be. Anyway, I was very angry and demanded that something be done. After all, I said, the French said it came from here. No one in the leadership appeared to have any knowledge of where the rumors had originated. After considerable discussion, the meeting came to a very unsatisfactory conclusion. While it was generally agreed that I should return to Paris with proper party credentials, nothing to my knowledge was ever done to get at the source of the security breach. A few days later, I went to see Louis Burnham, a young black friend of mine who had been enthusiastic about my project and had helped to sponsor and promote it. Lou was then editor of Freedom, Paul Robeson's paper, and he greeted me warmly. "What the hell happened over there?" he asked, and I ran down the whole story for him. He said he had heard about the charges against me at a meeting of the staff. We were dumbfounded. He named the staff members, all of whom I knew. Then, with a thoughtful look, he said, "One guy said, 'I'm not surprised to hear that about Harry.'" "Who was that guy?" I interrupted. Lou suddenly clammed up and refused to tell me. I pleaded with him, but he only said, "It doesn't matter, Harry. It occurred in a staff meeting, and I can't go around circulating stories about what happened in staff meetings." So I then pulled out my burner on Lou and said, "Bitch, you gonna tell me something? For real, what is this? Man, stop all this like, oh man, I can't spread secrets. I can't be a chatty patty. Nigga, you said it. Motherfucker, let that shit drop, man." Anyway, I'm sorry. This is frustrating for me. I could not imagine. This is why, this political biography shit I could never write, because I would be pissed off, like really like writing my feelings up in the chat. You know what I mean? Not up in the chat, up on the page. You get what I'm saying? But anyway, I pleaded with him, but he only said, "It doesn't matter, Harry. It occurred in a staff meeting, and I can't go around circulating stories about what happened in staff meetings." I left Lou and walked down 125th Street, wondering who my accuser was. I never found out and never went back to Paris. Oh, the burn. On returning from Paris in the fall of 1950, I could see that the party was in a panic and hysteria, retreating in the face of the government's attack on the party and the left. The Makarin Act had just been passed, making communism a foreign conspiracy and communists foreign agents. Described by many as a blueprint for fascism, the act called for the registration of communists and laid the basis for deportation and prosecution under the Smith Act of thousands of party members. In September 1949, I have been among a crowd of 15,000 at a peace rally in Peekskill, New York, when a gang of fascist thugs attacked the crowd just as Paul Robeson was on stage singing. In late 1951, 83-year-old W.B. Du Bois was tried on a charge of espionage for his sponsorship of the World Peace Appeal, a petition against the war in Korea. The government accused a quiet young Jewish couple from the Lower East Side, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, of being master atom spies. They were arrested in July 1950 and executed 3 years later. Despite a massive international defense campaign on their behalf. Following the jailing of the party leaders in 1951, secondary party leaders were indicted in a number of states. These included Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, Claudia Jones, Pettis Perry, Betty Gannett, Al Lennon, Oleta O'Connor Yates, and Steve Nelson. Years of illusions about bourgeois democracy had left the party virtually unprepared for this government assault. Our party had clearly never expected such a development and had not built an effective secret apparatus. When we did make a feeble attempt to set up some sort of underground in the early 50s, its main purpose was not to continue the work under changed conditions, but to hide the party, to weather the storm, so to speak. This period of repression, which would normally have been anticipated and planned for by communists, came as a surprise to our leadership. Their immediate response was to greatly overestimate the attack. Party offices and sections were closed down, mass work cut back, and membership consciously allowed to drop off. The Politburo dissolved the southern region of the party. This approach only served to increase the hysterical atmosphere in the party, as well as taking a concrete step toward its organizational liquidation. I went to see Henry Winston at the national office the day before he was scheduled to begin serving his sentence, but no one was there except Ben Davis. I asked him what he thought I could do to help the party, but decided not to take his advice when he said, just go out and lose yourself. Thousands of other party members, however, were actually directed to go out and start new lives for themselves, to have no contact with the party, to do no political work. Many were never heard from again. While the top leadership was in jail, Pettis Perry and Betty Gannett became the administrative committee of the party, a sort of caretaker leadership. They made day-to-day policy decisions and provided the main link with the underground section of the leadership. Foster remained as party chairman, but his health kept him mostly confined to his apartment in the Bronx. Gannett and Perry actively fostered such liquidationist moves. While many comrades feared to re-register, the party also deliberately lost contact with hundreds of its members. There are some high-level party functionaries who believe that a secret decision was made by the National Board at this time to drop 1/3 of the membership in order to make the party a smaller, more manageable cadre organization. Whether or not this actually took place, it is in effect what happened. In 1956, Foster evaluated the period of the Cold War and characterized the approach taken to security as the worst era of the whole Cold War period. It did our party great injury in losses of members and mass contacts, he wrote. Foster incorrectly characterized this era as leftism instead of seeing it as part of the whole rightward retreat of the party. Police and FBI infiltration reached new heights in this period. This is sad. Once again, this is so, like, imagining how it started with, him, sort of on a whim, meeting some guy who said, hey, you want to go study in Russia? And the communists were on the rise. And, he was just getting flown out to Moscow and met up with all these bright-eyed, idealistic young people from all over the world who want to go and fight for the rights of workers and the oppressed minorities in their country, being a part of this mass global movement that had so much, energy and fire behind it. And then by, the 1940s and 50s, the party is basically saying, hey, man, we're just breaking up, man. Go outside and get drunk. Don't even come back, man. It's done. We're waving the white flag instead of the red one. It's just really disheartening. It's almost like, once again, this is a long tragedy over a long lifetime. And it's, I really wish he described his feelings during this joint. And I don't know if that's that old school, mentality that, men had back in the day where you're not supposed to share your feelings, or simply because this is a political biography more about the events and the ideology and the movement rather than his personal feelings, I think that, would have been very helpful to, just make this text more living and breathing. It's still a very powerful and moving text, but I'm reading in, what this man felt, the organization he dedicated his life for, the movement he dedicated his life for, is having victory halfway across the world, but where he's at in America, where the fight should be the strongest, is barely holding together. It's just sad. Anyway, the party's phony war. Things weren't easy for Bell and myself at this time either. We were still broke, unemployed, and unemployable. I was working with the party's education department and teaching some classes, as well as working with William Patterson on We Charge Genocide, but none of this paid any money. It seemed that the FBI was always about one step behind me. When I did get a job, usually as a waiter, I would be fired a few days later for some inexplicable reason. Eventually, a friend helped me get into Local 6 of the Hotel and Restaurant Workers Union, and I was then able to hold down some jobs with a measure of security. Against this background of panic, hard times, and police infiltration and harassment, the party continued its march to the right. Inevitably, our revolutionary line and program on the Afro-American question was left to fall by the way. Concomitantly, white chauvinistic attitudes and practices were once more on the rise. What was needed was a reaffirmation of our revolutionary line and an intensive campaign of education, in combination with mass work. The leadership responded, instead, with what I would characterize as the phony war against white chauvinism. Rather than coming out wholeheartedly in support of our revolutionary position, a kind of moral crusade was launched which was completely divorced from any mass work. Refusing to examine the full implications of black oppression as national oppression, it was assumed that chauvinistic practices could be eliminated by wiping out wrong ideas and attitudes of the party rank and file. White chauvinism came to be considered as a sort of phenomenon, a thing in itself, separate from the fight for black rights and proletarian revolution. In the end, white chauvinism was strengthened as a result of this phony war. In discussing the period, I cannot overemphasize the effects of FBI and police infiltration, provocation, and incitement, and their consistently and consciously disruptive activities. I am sure that agents were involved from start to finish on both sides of the fence, although none were actually exposed through the campaign. I'm pretty sure, J. Edgar Hoover was hands-on, working on, destroying the Communist Party from within. If you don't know, J. Edgar Hoover was the longtime leader of the FBI, famously told Martin Luther King to go kill himself in a handwritten letter. So I wouldn't be surprised, if this is practice COINTELPRO. What he was going to do to the Black Panthers later, J. Edgar Hoover did to the Communist Party in the 40s and 50s. You get what I'm saying? But anyway, the struggle began with an article in the June 1949 Political Affairs, which was written by Pettis Perry, newly appointed head of the National Negro Commission. Perry pointed to numerous manifestations of white chauvinism, which undoubtedly the party had to overcome in order to play a leading role in the rising civil rights struggles of the time. But Perry was not capable of giving correct leadership to the struggle, since he shared the general rightist orientation of the National Committee. In fact, all this activity on his part, it seemed to me, was a cover for our failure to boldly take up or initiate mass struggle in the black movement. In fact, all this activity on his part, it seemed to me, was a cover for our failure to boldly take up or initiate mass struggle in the black movement, leaving us to tail the NAACP. From the start, the struggle emphasized administrative solutions, expulsions, penalties, and removing people from leadership, in a complete distortion of proper communist methods of criticism and self-criticism. The purpose of criticism is to strengthen the party, to consolidate the cadres behind the correct line, and practice through exposing errors and rectifying them in practice. When Jokinen and Finnish communists from Harlem was found guilty of white chauvinism in 1939, his program for rectification involved playing a leading role in the movement for black rights. Jokinen did this, fully vindicating himself in the eyes of the party and the black masses. No such actions were taken in the phony war. Instead, inquisitorial-type hearings and committees were set up. Veteran cadres raked over the coals, often with little or no cause, censured, and many expelled. A view developed which contended that the party could not move forward, that mass work had to wait, until all vestiges of white chauvinism were driven from the ranks. This view was thoroughly idealist and contradicted the experiences of the socialist countries, where the struggle against great nation chauvinism goes on even in the period of socialist development. So basically what he's saying here is that the Communist Party said, hey guys, we're going to wage a war on racism and we're going to kick out any racists, right? Without tying it to, what Harry Haywood was fighting for his entire life. Black self-determination, black nationhood, and black civil and equal and economic rights as a fundamental part of combating white supremacy. This is like, basic 101. Even most liberals get this. And I can't believe that the leftist Communist Party started, going down this type of bullshit where, the way to solve racism is just to punish racists. Well, no, even the liberals know that economic justice, social justice, cultural awareness, and many other things have to be contributed in the fight against white supremacy, or as Harry Haywood is framing it, white chauvinism. But I can't believe that the communists here were just saying yeah, we're going to wage a war against racism. We're just going to kick them out. Anyway. This purist approach led the fight to take on a sort of intramural character, in which success was measured not by the organization of mass struggles in defense of black rights, but in the number of comrades against whom disciplinary action was taken. It was an atmosphere which was conducive to the development of a particularly paternalistic and patronizing form of white chauvinism, as well as to a rise in petty bourgeoisie narrow nationalism among blacks. The growth of the nationalist side of this distortion was directly linked to the breakdown of the basic division of labor among communists in relation to the national question. This division of labor, long ago established in our party and the international communist movement, places main responsibility for combating white chauvinism on the white comrades, with blacks having main responsibility for combating narrow nationalist deviations. When Pettis Perry came forward as the chief prosecutor of white chauvinists, this division of tasks, so essential to building firm unity of the races, was clearly violated. Basically what he's saying is that it's white people in the Communist Party of yesteryear, when the party was actually radical, it was white people's job to call out white racists and white supremacists, or as he phrases it, white chauvinists. But in this new party that is filled to the hilt with agents, CIA, FBI, whatever, now Pettis Perry, a black man, is going up to white people in the party and saying, you're racist, buddy. You need to get out of the party, buddy. You need to be so ashamed of yourself for calling yourself a communist and doing a white chauvinism. That's what, it's so ridiculous. And by the way, that is a very, very, radical way of dealing with racism. I actually like that. It would be hard to trust some white people to carry out that job. You know what I'm saying? Essentially, it's like the police investigating themselves. But if we have a good running organization where everybody is a committed leftist that understands white supremacy, you know what I mean? I could trust my white friends to handle Brad and Connor when they do a racism. But nevertheless, we can only dream, right? We can only dream. I do think, ideally, though, in an organization like this, that's the way it should be run. White people need to be calling out other white people for racism rather than having that be the burden of black people within the organization. But anyway, so when Pettis Perry came forward as the chief prosecutor of white chauvinists, this division of tasks, so essential to building firm unity of the races, was clearly violated. On the one hand, it allowed the leading white comrades to abdicate their responsibilities in fighting chauvinism and rallying white workers in defense of black rights, while on the other, it left Perry and other leading blacks as the defenders of blacks against white chauvinists. The dangers of narrow nationalism were ignored. The view developed that any act by a white person which any black resented was ipso facto white chauvinism. Such an analysis was, of course, completely devoid of class content. In the final analysis, it was used to attack our revolutionary line on the black national question, which was always based on the fight for international solidarity of the working class. Both tendencies, racist paternalism and narrow nationalism, merged in a line of capitulation to the imperialist ruling class. The common denominator of both, their theoretical foundation, rested in the treatment of peoples, comprising an oppressed nation as a socially undifferentiated mass. All blacks, regardless of their class, were considered revolutionary. This is just retarded. This is stupid. This is really stupid. This is Is this what woke sounds like to Republicans and right wing, fascists? Like all blacks, regardless of the class, they are the vanguards of the revolution. Shut the fuck up. This is retarded. Oh my God, this is retarded. I can't believe how far the party had fallen at this time. And once again, I know some people might see the title of this and think I'm attacking the CPUSA now. I'm not. I'm not attacking the CPUSA now, and I'm not attacking, American communists in general. But once again, reading all of this should help us learn from the past and see how far, revisionism can take us away from the goal of actually, total liberation for all humanity and fighting against the capitalist exploitative class that creates these divisions like white chauvinism. Oh my God. This has to be, like, if you're a Republican and somebody tells you, Black Lives Matter, safe spaces, trigger warnings, this is, and you see that, right toy just turn red in the face, veins popping out of their neck. This is what that sounds like to me. Jesus Christ. Anyway. At the time, I wrote about the character white supremacy took on, saying, in this case, the capitulation of white comrades to Negro nationalism is in itself an expression of white chauvinism, reflecting a hangover of bourgeoisie liberal paternalistic attitudes. Of all forms of white chauvinism, I wrote, patronization is the most subtle, insidious, and perhaps most pernicious type because it parades under the banner of concern for the Negro, sometimes hiding a real desertion of the struggle for Negro rights. It is a form which tolerates, coddles, encourages, and panders to Negro bourgeoisie nationalism as it retreats before it. I can't, bruh. I can't. I'm gonna become MAGA. If I was there, I would have became MAGA. I would have said, I hate you all. I'm leaving. Anyway, Acti is laughing at me in the chat. She says, you look frustrated with this chapter. I'm frustrated, yes, deeply frustrated. These past few chapters show that this book is like a real tragedy, like laying out, slowly. Like everything he loves and desires and works so hard for is just turning its back on him and becoming really gay. It's just becoming like hella gay. I'm sorry. A double standard existed whereby white comrades might criticize other whites, but not black comrades. A white making a criticism of a black comrade for narrow nationalism was usually branded as chauvinist, i.e. racist. This denied blacks the benefits of criticism and self-criticism. I remember how such patronization thoroughly angered many of our working class black cadres. As the struggle wore on, and it lasted a good 4 years, it assumed a more and more vicious character. I have no doubt that the FBI considered it a job well done. White comrades began to fear visiting black comrades, afraid they might do or say something that could be considered white chauvinist. The war was even carried into the realm of semantics. Comrades who used expressions like black coffee or black sheep were liable to be charged with chauvinism. So it's crazy, the government, in the federal prisons and like the state prisons throughout the country, they're divided by race. Mexicans on one side, whites on the other side, blacks over here. You get what I'm saying? In general, not every prison is segregated, but we know that was created by the government, especially during like the 60s and 70s when we had so many prison riots and guards were getting their shit pushed back and so many people were breaking out of jail, political prisoners and shit like that. So the government decided to separate, the prisoners based on race, and now we have race wars raging throughout the prisons in America. And it's crazy that they did the same thing inside the Communist Party, created a race war, but instead it was the call-out, cancel, woke culture that everybody seems to hate. God, like the FBI invented woke culture. The FBI invented cancel culture. Because they had the communists turning on each other, where if a white comrade said, hey, I like my coffee black, the other black communists and other communists will say, damn, Connor, you're a fucking racist. You need to get out. This is crazy. I can't with this chapter. This is so frustrating. Anyway, I was at the wedding of a mixed couple. Oh my God. I was at the wedding of a mixed interracial couple when someone, whom I and others strongly suspected of being an agent, led a walkout in protest of the wedding cake. Bruh. Let's read that sentence again, together. Let's all read this together, class. I was at the wedding of a mixed couple when someone whom I and others strongly suspected of being an agent led a walkout in the protest of the wedding cake. The bride and the groom at the top were both white. Bruh. Earl Conrad was a very close friend of the party. In 1950, he wrote Rock Bottom, the story of a black woman in the Florida Everglades, where blacks lived under very primitive and slave-like conditions. Somehow this book, which was based on actual interviews, was construed to be degrading to black people, and Conrad was heavily censured by the party for white chauvinism. There were countless other incidents like these. This is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. Yo, the FBI, they deserve all the, smoke. The FBI deserves all the smoke. It sounds like they are having extreme white guilt and anxiety because of it. Exactly. The FBI invented white guilt. The FBI invented white fragility. They were the FBI pretended to be the sneezily, dorky, skinny-looking, frail soy boy in the Communist Party who said, I think it's racist if we don't give the blacks everything. And, we deserve to get called out. Like, that was that. The FBI sent their best agents. They sent their best agents to basically, turn white guilt into the ammunition to destroy the Communist Party. It's crazy. It's crazy. The other thing really struck home when Bell was accused of white chauvinism. Oh, God, they're calling his wife racist. They're calling his wife racist. The whole thing really struck home when Bell was accused of white chauvinism in early 1953. She had been working as a manager at the Jefferson School lunchroom. One day, a young black man returned to the counter where she was serving and stated that she had given him 25 cents too much change. Bell thanked him and asked how she made the error since she didn't want to repeat it. The young man opened his hand with change still in it, and Bell pointed with her index finger, noting that she had given him too many quarters. Later that afternoon, the young man came back and told her he resented her act. What act? She asked. The act of white chauvinism when you went into my hand. Bruh. This is the FBI, bruh. The FBI was just giving money to everybody. If you knew a communist, the FBI probably knocked at your door. Hey, do you want to make $100 real quick? That's probably how it works. Like, bruh, how does this young black man even know the term white chauvinism? Most Americans, I'm going to be frank, they weren't more intelligent back then. Most people didn't even know chauvinism at the time and don't know it now. So I'm sure the FBI said, hey, that guy just talked to Harry Haywood's white wife. Let's do this. Hey, buddy, come over here. I'm going to give you $20 if you go over there to say this to her. Anyway, Bell explained that she had only meant to check herself and certainly intended no insult. The student refused to be mollified by this and insisted that it was white chauvinism. Bell refused to accept this view, and they debated a few minutes when suddenly he asked, "Who is your husband?" "What does my husband have to do with this?" she asked, refusing to answer the question. "You're a white chauvinist like all the rest of white Americans," he shouted and left the cafeteria. Bell reported the incident to Doxy Wilkerson, who was on the staff of the school. At the time, he agreed with her that no act of white chauvinism was involved. He explained to Bell that there was a tendency to distort the struggle against white chauvinism among some of the younger students. About a month later, however, a committee was set up to investigate the matter and found Bell guilty of 17 separate acts of white chauvinism stemming from the incident and of developing an entire white chauvinist line. I have to ask, did Bell drop that line one time? Did she say one time, "I can't be a white chauvinist. My husband is black"? You think she burst out with it? Maybe it's on the next page. But I know that would have been the go-to for any white woman. No matter how petty the situation is. Like, okay, Bell, she probably is not like a card-carrying hardcore communist like her husband and stuff like that. She's just along for the ride because she loves her man. You get what I'm saying? But do you think once Bell dropped, like, "My husband is black," in reply? I don't know. It was to be 8 months before she was cleared of these charges, and even then the leadership tried to cover up the political questions in order to establish peace. Involved in the accusations that were brought against Bell were not only the school staff, but representatives of the state leadership as well. All exhorted her to accept the view of the student, since her refusal only compounded the errors of white chauvinism. The student later admitted that he had asked about her husband because he believed that most women who marry Negro men are more chauvinistic than others. Okay, they were just wilding back then. Not a word of criticism of the student was raised with regards to this slander. In fact, his position was only supported by a black woman on the school staff and by the state representative. The attack on my wife was unmistakably directed at me as well. If Bell were a white chauvinist, then what must her black husband be? Okay, so Harry, you didn't have to drop that line. Surely the most base, groveling conciliator of white chauvinism. So they're saying he's a Uncle Tom. He's a RACOON. He's a Steven from Django, is what they're trying to say. The incident clearly served the interest of the rising reformist trend in the party. Such situations were fertile ground for the enemy, whose infiltrations were stepped up both within and without the party. I'd often find two characters from the FBI waiting for me at my doorstep, and they would follow me down to the subway station a few blocks away at 103rd Street in Central Park West. "Hey, Harry, how long are you going to stand for what they're doing to you and your wife?" they would ask. "Look what they did to you in California and in Spain. Why don't you get next to yourself, man, and cooperate with us? We don't want to take you to the stand." I would walk along, paying them no mind, until we reached the station entrance. It was early morning rush hour and hundreds of people, including many progressives and CP members who knew me, were entering the station. The agents would follow me right up to the rail and then holler, "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Haywood. Thank you very much." The idea of this kind of harassment was obviously to break down my defenses and add yet another recruit to their roster of informants and stool pigeons. I got to know this pair quite well, as they were my regular tails for several months. In the meantime, I became more and more concerned with the party's so-called war on white chauvinism. The whole method and atmosphere surrounding Bell's case, the persecution of a devoted working-class cadre, smacked me of the most crass form of opportunism and stool pigeonry. During all the meetings concerning the matter, there was no attempt to get at the substance of the charges, only to convince Bell that she was guilty. It amounted to no more than political bullying and a bureaucratic stifling of all criticism. I prepared a document in protest of the frame-up and presented it at a meeting where the charges were finally dropped. In the paper, I discussed not only Bell's case, but the broader implications such distortions have for the unity of black and white students at the school and in the party as a whole. I was convinced that something more had to be done about the situation and went to talk about it with Foster at his apartment in the Bronx. He and Bell were old friends from the minor struggles in Kentucky and Pennsylvania. He was concerned about her case as well as the general situation in the party. He told me that the party in Denver had been virtually liquidated through such distortions. I showed him the document I had prepared, and he invited me to attend a meeting of the National Board to discuss the matter. When the topic came up on the agenda, Pettis Perry began his usual ritual recounting of yet another incident of white chauvinism. But I took this wind out of his sails when I pointed to the many distortions of this struggle. Yes, I said, there is white chauvinism in the party, but it has combined with petty bourgeoisie nationalism, and we must wage a fight on both fronts. I was very angry when Foster cut me off. True, the party had to stop this campaign. It had gone too far, he said. There were too many excesses, but there was no danger of petty bourgeoisie nationalism. What was involved here, according to Foster, was the old perennial party menaced left sectarianism. It's so frustrating. Oh my God. It's so frustrating that in every organization they're scared of the left. Like with the Democrats right now, they're scared of Zoran. Zoran, big bad Zoran, and the AOCs and the Bernie bros. The left is always so scary. It's so disheartening. Why does everybody want to be a fucking Republican? Why does everybody want to be so fucking right-wing? Even in the Communist Party. Even in the Communist Party, they're scared of their own left. And they're going as far right as possible, as the parameters allow. So frustrating. I'm going to pull my eyes out. This line seemed absurd to me, but Foster was able to win over the national board with it. Following the meeting, Foster wrote an article, Left Sectarianism in the Fight for Negro Rights and Against White Chauvinism. What the fuck, bruh? Bruh? What? Make it make sense. Which was successful in putting an end to this most vicious and destructive campaign. Foster's line of attack, however, effectively took the heat off the right and capitulated fully to the bourgeoisie reformists in the party. Foster failed miserably to understand how the whole campaign served the rights all along the way, from the further physical liquidation of the party to pulling back from a leading role or any role in the mass movement, to substituting petty bourgeoisie nationalism and demagoguery for our revolutionary line. White chauvinism was actually strengthened, becoming increasingly entrenched in the party. I tend to think that a number of honest comrades were not able to take a correct stand in this struggle because of a failure to understand the class basis of petty bourgeoisie nationalism and the potential threat it posed to the party. The view was then prevalent that narrow nationalism was only a reflex, a subjective reaction to white chauvinism. To combat it, one need only take up the fight against white chauvinism. This view is fundamentally incorrect. Although chauvinism certainly does stimulate such tendencies, narrow nationalism has its own social and economic base among the ghetto nationalists of the black petty bourgeoisie and bourgeois strata. The nationalism of these sectarians reflect, in the main, the struggle of the small black entrepreneur or the middle-class professional whose market and sphere of activity is confined almost exclusively to the ghetto. Such strata finds themselves in competition both with small and medium-sized white business in the black community, as well as with the monopolist. The nationalism of these strata has two aspects, one expressing their aspirations for social equality and against Jim Crow, the other expressing the tendency to retain the segregated market. Thus, their stand toward imperialism is continually vacillating. I think too many comrades tended to confuse the progressive national aspirations of black people for liberation with narrow nationalism as an ideology. I can now see in retrospect how well all this fit in with the growing attack on the party's revolutionary line, which based itself on the fighting, principled unity of black and white, and the leading role of the working class in the struggle for equality. As manifested within the party, the petty bourgeois nationalist deviation reflected a lack of faith in the working class and its communist vanguard. How the pessimists wondered, could the inherently racist white working class ever be rallied to support the fight for black liberation? This pessimism was extended even to black comrades who seriously fought for the internationalist position in the party, as was evident in the attack on Bell and myself. This position is actually one of retreat before the ideology of white chauvinism, equivalent to giving up to the white supremacist enemy. And this is why I am not an Afro-pessimist. God, that was so good. That was such a great way of explaining why Afro-pessimism is not helpful towards our eventual liberation, and it is not eternal. You get what I'm saying? Afro-pessimism essentially says, like, yo, the white working class, poor whites, white people in general will always be racist. It's inherent to our world. The world is built upon the suppression of the black body. And in this case, you know, the communists will say, no, we're living under a temporary system where capitalism rules. They've created these paradigms that pit white versus black and different classes against each other and genders against gender, etc. We need to unite to fight against the exploiters. You get exactly what I'm saying. And so saying we're going to continue to purge the party of racists is just an inherently false thing. Like you're just a snake trying to eat its own tail, or a dog chasing its own tail, etc. Like at the root cause of these, racist ideas that permeate in society is the capitalist superstructure that permeates them. Literally, the FBI went in there to make sure that people were divided upon race. You get what I'm saying? So I find this very, very good. That was one of the best paragraphs in this book. I'm happy. I'm very happy. So the phony war created hostility, bitterness, and distrust among formerly close comrades. This was reflected in the breakup of the party organization and individuals into hostile camps. The constant pressures of outlandish charges, unprincipled accusations, police harassment, and seemingly unresolvable antagonisms had a telling effect on many individual relationships, including my relationship with Belle. Such circumstances eventually led to the breakup of our marriage in 1955. Damn, man. Married 3 times. Married 3 times. Married 3 times. Man, what? What? I did not see that coming. So he lost Belle. Man them got married 3 times. Can't keep abroad. Can't keep abroad. A prime example of the ideological confusion and lack of clarity which accompanied the distorted struggle against white chauvinism was the Jefferson School Memorandum, whose principal author was Doxey Wilkerson. This document originated as papers prepared for an educational conference on race theories held by the school in the fall of 1951. The purported reason for the conference was to develop further the Marxist conception of the Negro question as a national question. But in the guise of polemics against bourgeois racist ideology, it turned out to be another attack on our revolutionary position. Motec says, hello, Simon. Hello, Motec. Shout out to Motec out there, whoever you are. Let us know what you think of this text or whatever you got to say. Put it in the chat. Glad you could join. All right. Okay, Motec is talking about Tunisia. We're not here to talk about Tunisia, Motec. We're here to talk about communism. Here to talk about communism and black nationalism. But much love to the people of Tunisia. Please, okay? All right. Anyway, I'm continuing here. The author's position was cloaked in a lot of pseudoscientific verbiage, but boiled down to the outlandish argument that race and racial characteristics had nothing to do with the special oppression of Afro-Americans. The position was based on 2 fallacious ideas. The first was that there was no races of mankind and the term Negro race has no meaning and should be abandoned. The second was that the definition of Negro referred to a person who shares the common psychological makeup of the Negro people of the United States. I was quite alarmed when I first read this memorandum, coming as it did in the midst of the destructive campaign against white chauvinism. I felt it would further distort the struggle and introduce new confusion into an already poorly understood area. Just how would the party explain to the masses of blacks that race was not a factor in their subjugation? How would the party develop struggle against white chauvinism among the white workers if the Negro race did not exist? How would the party uphold the special internationalist responsibilities of Afro-Americans to support the struggles of blacks in Africa and Latin America? Obviously, adopting Doxey's line would lead to isolating the party from the masses of blacks, abandoning of national oppression, and that it was wrong to counterpose the two. It was clearly idealism and not Marxism to try to overcome the phenomena of racial differences and white chauvinism by discarding the term race. This denial of reality was one of the more bizarre forms taken by assimilationism. I'm so disheartened that the party was basically going to like, oh my God, like damn near like white grandma levels of like trying to fight the racist problem by saying, guys, what if we just stopped talking about race? This is literally the Communist Party in 1950. 1950, they were saying, guys, bright idea. What if we just stopped talking about it? What? Isn't that Marxist? Isn't that what? How did we get here? How did we get here? Anyway, I'm going to continue. The publication and circulation of the Wilkerson Memorandum touched off considerable debate and discussion, which would last for almost a year. When I submitted my article to Political Affairs, I felt it would add to this discussion and help clarify the issues. I found, however, that Doxey and the co-authors of the memorandum had a protector in Betty Gannett. She was very reluctant to publish my article, for its sharpness might discredit these important leaders, members of the party's educational department. After all, she said, the matter was still being discussed and meetings were scheduled to clarify the matter. Despite its timeliness and my insistence, the publication of my article was postponed. I attended several of the meetings to discuss the position put forward by the memorandum. Even with the sharp discussion and the difficulty the authors had in defending their position, many comrades were reluctant to characterize the position for what it was, a harmful deviation which undermined the struggle against white chauvinism. In fact, the position struck at the root of our revolutionary line by denying the concrete facts and particular forms of national oppression of Afro-Americans. I realized that if Betty Gannett had her way, publication of my article would continue to be postponed. In early spring, several months after I submitted the draft to Political Affairs, I sent a copy to Foster and asked his opinion. I received a reply on April 21, 1952, in which he agreed with the main line of the article. He offered several criticisms which helped to strengthen the document, and I incorporated them into a new draft. Evidently, he also sent copies of these letters to Political Affairs and the Jefferson School. It wasn't long after I received his reply that I was called into another meeting with Lil Gates, Theodore Bassett, and Alberto Moreau, the education director of the New York district. Doxey, Howard, Selsam, and David Goldway from the Jefferson School staff were also present. I made a rather lengthy presentation at this meeting, reading my document. Doxey attempted to defend his position, but quickly found that those present no longer agreed with him. At one point, Selsam exclaimed, "Doxey, you're talking like a bourgeoisie professor." Doxey's position was thoroughly rejected, and it was agreed that my article would be printed in the PA. I was somewhat surprised, therefore, to see it wasn't in the next issue of the journal. I couldn't understand what had postponed its publication. My answer came in the August of 1952 PA in an article titled Race, Nation, and the Concept Negro by Doxey Wilkerson. The article was a lengthy self-criticism, rejecting his earlier formulations and characterizing it as a theoretically unsound and politically harmful deviation. Well, that's just bitch made. That's just totally bitch made. So the party wouldn't let this guy get schooled by an OG. So instead, they let this guy parrot a bunch of bullshit about black people in the party's official publication. And then instead of Harry being able to reply in public because he said something stupid in public, they let this guy, apologize and criticize himself before he could be proven wrong. You know what I mean? This is kind of ridiculous. Really, really silly bitch-made shit. I'm sorry. Anyway, I found that he had adopted most of the criticisms I had made of his position. This recantation had been long in coming, as its timing took much of the sting out of my polemic, rendering it as a rather anticlimactic part of the struggle. Finally, in October 1952, it was published, changed somewhat in light of Doxey's self-criticism. The long delay showed clearly that the leadership was not willing to give credit or prominence to any spokesman for the revolutionary tendency in the party. Wilkerson's theory was in itself of little significance. It was too preposterous to have any lasting impact. Its real significance was in the manner in which the party leadership was able to use it to obscure the real issues and suppress the ideological struggle necessary to reassert a Marxist-Leninist position on the national question. By protecting and promoting Wilkerson's theory, the leadership forcibly shifted the focus of the debate away from the key questions: self-determination and the party's leadership role in the black liberation and working class struggle. It was no accident that Wilkerson's assimilationist approach developed to muddy the waters in this period of the march to the right. It left the field open for all sorts of liberal bourgeoisie theories and was an expression of the rising trend in the party to tail after the bourgeoisie assimilationist leadership of the NAACP. Reformism in the field of work among blacks would politically express itself much more clearly in the coming years with the complete acceptance of the NAACP as the vanguard, the vital center of the Negro People's Movement. The resurgence of this right-wing trend in the party was given added encouragement by the prosperity of the war and immediate post-war period. Figures from the Department of Labor reveal that during these years, for the first time in history, there appeared a trend toward closing the gap between black and white living standards. From 1939 to 1947, earnings of blacks increased from 41.4% to 54.3% of white wages. Interesting. Big business in the U.S. was pushing more funds into the corruption and co-optation of black leadership, the building up of a token elite as a contingency against future black revolts. This corrupting influence was greatly stepped up during the Cold War. The Truman administration made a rash of appointments of black assistants to the department heads and agencies of the federal government. A black woman, Mrs. Edith Sampson, was appointed to the American delegation to the United Nations. Well, good for her. Black goodwill ambassadors were dispatched to the former colonial nations of Asia and Africa to polish up the new image which Uncle Sam sought to present as the champion of peace, freedom, and democracy. Ambassadorial Uncle Toms, quipped Earl Brown, a journalist and later Harlem councilman. According to black leaders, however, integration was right around the corner. These hopes were later embodied by the NAACP slogan, Free by 63. Direct and imminent integrationism was to continue as the dominant trend through the early stages of the Black Revolt until the rise of the Black Power movement in the middle 60s. But the economic base of this brief black prosperity was actually destroyed with the series of recessions that followed the Korean War. A structural type of unemployment developed, the result of permanent destruction of jobs by automation rather than merely cyclical layoffs. The blow hit blacks the hardest because they had the lowest seniority, having entered industry the latest. The crisis in the cities was aggravated by the farm crisis, which thrust 1 million black soil tillers upon a shrinking labor market at a time when the skills they possessed were made obsolete by the new technology. As a prelude to the revolts of the 60s, deep unrest engulfed black communities across the country. A small cloud no bigger than a man's fist, Elijah Muhammad's Nation of Islam had already appeared on the horizon, a harbinger of the great black power nationalist upsurge to come. I'd be very interested to hear what Harry has to say about the Nation of Islam, and if Malcolm X will be mentioned. If Harry meets Malcolm X, bruh, I gotta put this book in my top 5 books of all time. Right now, it's up there in like top 15. It's top 15 books, definitely. But if he meets Malcolm X and he like blows Big Kush with Malcolm X in the back of like a limo, talking about his times in Russia, man, bruh. Anyway, very interesting stuff here. Once again, so much of this book reads like it could also apply to 2025 because we're living through the effects of a major recession like they were at that time, and also another upcoming recession. It's so crazy. Everybody's so fucked up right now economically, and we're about to get hit with another recession. It's right around the corner. We're really about to be in some shit in a few months, if not by next year. With the rising price of everything, the trade war is still happening. I doubt the Ukraine war is going to end this year or next year. That's my little prediction. But we'll see. I think some shit is going to continue to get worse and worse economically. Anyway, into the mainstream. By the way, everybody, we're going to be wrapping up this chapter pretty soon. So we're going to wrap it up on page 605. We're on page 599, and that will be the end of chapter 21. So if you have any more comments or questions before we finish up this chapter, you have about, let's say, 10 more minutes before we wrap up this stream. And shout out to everybody who's been supporting this chat right here and supporting this content as well. Anyway, last section that I think we'll read for this chapter, into the mainstream. Despite such ominous portents, the right reformist tendency in the party continued to gather strength in its attempt to subvert and overthrow our revolutionary position. It began at first covertly as a sneak attack by the liberal integrationists like Jackson and Dennis, who formed the controlling group on the National Committee. We of the opposition found ourselves fighting a defensive action, unaware at first that the whole line was under attack. We struggled locally in clubs and sections, but we were rapidly overwhelmed by the integrationists who maintained the upper hand at all times. We were barred from the press and all other channels of inter-party communication. All right, Snake says, have you read or plan to read Negro Liberation? That is a very good point, Snake. I think I will. I think I will read Negro Liberation. That is a very good suggestion. The book is not that hard to find. I do have some other books that I really want to read. And I want to ask y'all right now, how would y'all feel about reading Mein Kampf? Let me know. If you're in the chat right now, I really want to, show my channel that I'm balanced, that I'm not just, gung-ho about one thing, that I have an open mind and that I want to be well-read and read everything. Well, how would y'all feel about reading Mein Kampf? Of course, we're not going to glaze Hitler, and we're definitely not going to be agreeing with a single word on the page, but to analyze the text and to understand how the white man thinks. Because let's keep it real, that's the white supremacist Bible. And if our enemies are the white supremacists, shouldn't we know what they believe and think? You get what I'm saying? I don't know. I do plan on reading Negro Liberation, though I do have some other books that I would like to get to that have been on the agenda for a while. But the Book React series will be a staple on this channel. As long as I have breath in my lungs, and as long as YouTube allows me to be on the platform, I plan on reading books on live stream with the people, because I really do enjoy this. I really, really love this. It's a way for me to educate myself and get out some information I think is important, and also to talk and learn with the people. You get what I'm saying? So, anyway, a full-scale reformist offensive was kicked off by articles and writings of some leading black communists who exaggerated the progressive role of the NAACP leadership in the liberation movement. Such theories downplayed the need for a fight within the movement and for the leadership of black workers as a guarantee of the development of a consistent and militant struggle for black rights. The theory for this position was elaborated by Charles T. Mann, pen name for James Jackson, in his pamphlet, Stalin's Thought Illustrates Problems of Negro Freedom, published in 1953. Mann characterized the modern national liberation movement of colonial and subject peoples as primarily a bourgeois effort, a struggle for the national bourgeoisie for control of its national markets, rather than a movement for the masses against imperialist oppression. This pamphlet was widely distributed in the party and was understood to mean uncritical acceptance of black right reformist leadership. It served as the opening gun in the attack on the party's black and working class cadres, especially its trade unionists who, according to Mann's position, were left sectarian for not accepting bourgeois leadership. With the Supreme Court decision of 1954, Brown v. the Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, outlawing school segregation, the party's pro-integrationist leadership threw all caution to the winds and went into panegyrics over the NAACP leadership. I got to know what that word means. Panegyrics. What is panegyrics? That is such a funny word. Panegyrics. Definition. A public speech, a published text in praise of someone or something. Okay. All right. It's an interesting word. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Let me see it. I'm gonna put that. How do we say that out loud? Hold on. Panegyric. That's my new favorite word. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right, I'm going to jump into the comments real quick. Modtech says, hi again, sorry to interrupt. I believe the next generation of Tunisia is more promising. Also, I think you should blame Europe too, as it's providing large amounts of funding for things to happen. Exactly. Kais Saied is taking money from the European Union to throw black people into cages, to have the police pick up black migrants and drop them off in the Sahara Desert. For anybody that doesn't know, Tunisia is slowly committing a black genocide throughout its country. And if you don't believe me, look up the picture of the dead black boy who was found on a beach in Sfax in Tunis. Kais Saied is anti-black and he deserves to get smacked. He deserves. Going on to the next comment. Arthur Sage says, if you want to know what they think, read the United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept by Neely Fuller Jr. Okay, I've heard of Neely Fuller Jr. He's dope. So, yeah, might read that. Might read that. Thank you for the suggestion, Arthur Sage. I appreciate that. So I guess that's a no on Mein Kampf. I guess that's a no on Mein Kampf. Okay. All right, no Mein Kampf. The people have spoken. I'm only an arbiter for the people. No Mein Kampf. And then tomorrow, welcome everybody to the new episode, Book React 14, Mein Kampf. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Anyway, I'm going to continue here. In 1956, Ben Davis wrote that a realistic perspective has opted... In 1956, Ben Davis wrote that a realistic perspective has opened up for a peaceful and democratic achievement of the full social, political, and economic equality of the Negro people within the framework of our specific American system and tradition. Agreeing wholeheartedly with the NAACP, the party leadership concluded that the Jim Crow system was threatened with imminent destruction, and the Supreme Court decision was the triumph of the NAACP's policy of legal opposition. Doxey Wilkerson hailed Thurgood Marshall, then a member of the NAACP's legal staff, as the hero of the Supreme Court battle. But the facts are that this decision, historic in its effect, was a tactical concession. Its objective was to lull the rising black movement at home, bolstering the faltering bourgeoisie assimilationist leadership and quieting the adverse criticism from abroad. Dr. Mordecai Johnson, then president of Howard University, put this forward at the 1954 CIO convention in Cleveland. Johnson alluded to the fact that the decision had been immediately translated into 40 languages. One could conclude from that the power of world socialism wrested this concession from the American ruling class circles, he said. During this period, the party completely underestimated the explosive nature of the black movement, denying the possibility of a revolutionary upsurge of blacks. According to the revisionists, the black struggle did not have an independent character, but was simply an offshoot of the larger workers' movement. Just 2 years before the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, James Jackson wrote, "To the Negro masses in the South who have yet to win their elementary democratic right to vote, to remove the Jim Crow pale in the streetcars, to sit in the public parks, such a slogan of action would be rejected, considered utopian." In the year of the boycott, Jackson actually went so far as to compare left centers in the black movement with dual unionism. These influential left centers were actually liquidated in the course of the general retreat of the rightists. The thinking behind this policy was that the NAACP covered the field and there was no need for us to intervene. It was at this time that the Civil Rights Congress was dissolved. Despite the militant mass campaigns it had waged on behalf of Dixie Lynch victims and the impact areas of work. The liquidation of the Council on African Affairs, which was headed by Dr. Du Bois, Dr. Alpheus Hunton, and Paul Robeson, immediately followed the historic Bandung Conference in 1955. Freedom, the sole organ of the left in the Black Liberation Movement, was also closed down at this time. By the mid-50s, the party in the South had, for all intents and purposes, once again been liquidated. The National Negro Labor Councils, or NNLC, was the largest and potentially the most influential organization dissolved by the party in this period. The NNLC drew about 1,000 delegates, mostly blacks from the basic industries, to its first 3 conventions and led numerous mass struggles against discrimination on the job. After the war, there were large concentrations of black workers in auto, steel, and packing houses and other heavy industries. These workers demanded leadership in the fight against company and union discrimination. The NNLC, calling openly for unity between the black freedom struggle and the labor movement, supplied this leadership in successful campaigns to get blacks hired at Sears and many other companies. The councils mobilized blacks and some whites to oppose the chauvinist leadership in unions like UAW Local 600, Ford's River Rouge plant, The NNLC was also active in black communities, as in Louisville, where their successful campaign for jobs showed a militant working class alternative to the increasingly conservative NAACP. When the black movement surged forward in 1955, it cried out for black working class leadership that the CP and the NNLC and freedom could have provided. But the CP leadership united in opposition to everything that diverted the masses from the mainstream of the NAACP and the AFL-CIO. Basically, yeah, they just let the bourgeois liberals, run the show and get credit for fighting Jim Crow and helping end segregation. With the consolidation of this liquidationist line, the party leadership attacked the NNLC. In June 1956, Benjamin Davis openly criticized the work of these councils and said that they had led to the isolation of many Negro trade union cadres from the main body of the Negro and white workers, and that as a result, these cadres became almost powerless to affect the mainstream of organized labor. The dissolution of these centers left a void in the movement, with many party and non-party cadres becoming demoralized, resigning from activity. With as good a sense of timing as ever, A. Philip Randolph stepped into the void that the party had left behind. In 1960, he founded the Negro American Labor Council, NALC, with the intent of harnessing the militant caucus movement under the firm control of the AFL-CIO bureaucracy. Randolph, and under his leadership of the NALC, refused to take a firm stand against discrimination. Randolph openly stated that the founding convention that discrimination in the unions was no reflection on the leadership of the AFL-CIO. At the 1962 convention, the councils failed to take up the NAACP petition to the NLRB, which would have had two unions decertified for failure to represent black workers. The rightist line on the Afro-American question was, of course, a part of the whole rightward drift in the party. Under the slogan of getting into the mainstream, the party attempted to liquidate all left centers and independent communist work. A number of articles were written at that time, many of them coming from underground leadership, which criticized purism, self-isolation, and left sectarianism in our work, characterizing leftism as the main danger in the party. In December 1952, the draft resolution on the situation growing out of the presidential elections, authorized by the National Committee, stated that it was incorrect to have favored departure of Wallace forces without the masses of the Democratic Party. According to the resolution, the major, if not exclusive, hope for progress was to be found in the Democratic Party. If the masses of workers weren't ready to desert the Democrats, neither was the CPUSA. This move also signaled the beginning of the destruction of the American Labor Party in New York State, where it still maintained considerable strength. Consequently, the party lost influence among many progressives. A more mature expression of this revisionist line came with the draft program, which appeared in April 1954, a month before the historic Supreme Court decision. The major slogans of action put forward in the document called for a new Congress in 1954 and a new administration in 1956. The draft program boldly asserted that what is needed in a new administration which starts to build again where the New Deal left off. The document excluded all mention of the right of self-determination. I questioned this at a meeting of the program committee prior to the passage of the resolution. I asked Betty Gannett what had happened to the right of self-determination. Why wasn't there a mention of it in the program? True, we were discussing the party's minimal program, and self-determination certainly wouldn't be fully laid out and explained in such a document. Yet it was a strategic slogan which, like socialism, had to be mentioned in relation to the party's minimal demands. Neither Gannett nor Pettis Perry, who was also present, knew what to say. They didn't seem prepared to discuss the question at the time. It was at this meeting that I first began to suspect that the leadership might once again try to liquidate the right of self-determination and the revolutionary program for black liberation. In the face of such open reformism, it isn't difficult to see why all attempts to do independent mass work were attacked and labeled left sectarian. I was working in Harlem with my old seaman friend, Josh Lawrence, and his organizational secretary, Pat Lumpkin, a very energetic and forceful black woman. We had a hell of a fight with Lil Gates and Blake Charney, New York's organizational secretary, who tried to liquidate our work. We waged a good battle against them, but in the end, very little was accomplished. As a result of the internal struggle, we did little mass work, and this was a general tendency in the party at the time. It was in this period that all proposals for mass work in the mainstream or anywhere else, and any attempts by communists to play a leading role were discouraged, condemned, and fought against by the leadership. Those of us who did try to do mass work were not helped or encouraged in any way, but rather castigated and beaten down, accused of being left sectarian. We were told to have respect for the bourgeois reformists in the black liberation movement, for the bureaucrats of the trade union aristocracy, to lay off and wait for favorable conditions to arise. But for our full participation, wait for favorable conditions to arise for our full participation. Through such policies, the party increasingly lost its once important roots in the shops, mills, and black working class communities. In the course of those years, I married Gwen Midlow. She was a young Jewish woman, 4 times a charm, I guess. Damn, he's got his 4th wife, Gwen Midlow. She was a young Jewish woman who I had met earlier in Paris when she and her husband were both music students there. So he was macking on a married woman. Okay, Harry. She came from New Orleans, where she had been an active member of the Southern Negro Youth Congress, participating in the Wallace Campaign, the Civil Rights Congress, and many other mass campaigns of the party in the South. We had political agreement on the major questions, and in particular, the black national question. I love how the women are just like randomly thrown in. Like, he goes through these long, periods of dealing with Communist Party bullshit, and then, oh yeah, guys, I got married again, by the way. 4th time's a charm. Like crazy. What happened to her previous husband? This is a political biography. You know this already. No comment there. Anyway, we're going to pick up on chapter 22, which is the last, final, complete, the end. It's the last chapter of this book, which is quite a doozy. So when we read this next time, we're going to read Revisionism Takes Command. But even though that is the final chapter, we still have the epilogue to read. And I wonder if the epilogue is just, I'm just going to zoom ahead real quick and see what's in the epilogue. Let's just zip on ahead. So the epilogue is right here. Okay, so it's just more reflections, I guess, on his life and where he is now and things like that. So the epilogue will also be one more episode. So we only have 2 more episodes of this book left, guys. We have chapter 22, which is titled A Party Weakened from Within, we just read. Chapter 22, Revisionism Takes Command. So this is going to be the final chapter, a sad note to end on for the party and for Harry's life dedicated to the party. But still, once again, a very captivating read. That was a very frustrating chapter. Oh my God, my brain hurts from that, reading all that type of stuff that went down back then. But nevertheless, I enjoyed being out here with all of you. Shout out to Arthur Sage. Shout out to Motech. Shout out to Sage. Shout out to Acti. Shout out to KL. And shout out to everybody who's going to watch this later in the review. I suggest watching these videos on 125 speed or 1.5, or if you're a big dog, 2x speed, but just blow right through it and absorb all that information. And we're going to come on live tomorrow to read the next chapter, which is going to be, I think, about, how many chapters is that? How many pages? It's about 23 pages. So we'll read 23 pages tomorrow and call it a wrap. Then after that, we'll have the epilogue, and that will be the end of this text. And much love. We're going to pop champagne. We're going to pop champagne at the end of the campaign. Until then, power to the people. Peace.